So sometime back I had watched Dune and Dune Part 2, and I thought that I really understood everything that was happening in Paul Atreides' story and his world. But now that I started to read the book by Frank Herbert, I realized that there's so much more that's going on in his mind that the movies could not show. Like, we've all seen what happened to Percy Jackson, right? Yeah, okay, so let's not go into that. One thing that specifically caught my attention was his prescience part. The way he sees the visions of possible futures. I want to explore like what would the possibilities have been if he were a real human being instead of being in a science fiction story. And the more I thought about it, the stranger the idea becomes. Because what does it actually mean for a human being to see the future? Is it a psychological phenomena? Could we connect it to the way our brains predict what happens next? Does physics give us any interesting way to think about time in the fourth dimension? And could spirituality interpret it as something completely different? So I wanted to take a step back from Dune and just not call it a science fiction story and explore Paul's visions and what they might look like through psychology, spirituality, physics, and finally the world that Herbert created. And no, for all the three different parts, you will not have to go anywhere. I will cover it in this video itself. So let's talk about part 1. We usually talk about Paul Atreides as the person who can see the future, but I think we sometimes miss the more disturbing question. What would seeing the future actually do to a human mind? Because Paul's prescience isn't just about knowing that something might happen. He begins to experience possible futures so vividly that they become almost like memories, right? And psychologically, that's fascinating because our brains already do something surprisingly similar, just on a much smaller scale. Our brain is constantly predicting what will happen next, right? When you see a ball flying towards you, your brain doesn't wait for the ball to reach your hand. You just don't go on thinking about the science behind it, maths behind it, trajectory, speed, and everything. It just predicts the trajectory. We use the memories, the patterns, the experiences, everything we know about it from the real world, and we construct possible futures. Now imagine just taking that ability, and pushing it to the extreme.
You fight when the necessity arises, no matter the mood. Now fight!
Paul has extraordinary training and incredibly analytical mind, Bene Gesserit conditioning, genetic memories, and then exposure to the spice dramatically expands his perception.
Somebody help me, please.
So perhaps the terrifying part isn't simply Paul can see the future, it's Paul can see so many possible futures that choosing one becomes a psychological burden. Okay, let's slow it down. Because then comes the question of free will. If we see something terrible coming and you change your actions because you saw it, did you prevent the future? Or did your attempt to prevent it become the reason it happened? And that brings us to the question that we would answer using physics. Like, we've all probably seen about how we think about invading the 2D creatures space. Like, if there are 2D beings which existed and we could invade their space, they would be moving forward, backward, left and right, and we would be able to see through their walls also, and through everything we could see their shape and size. And just think about it for a second. What if there are 4D beings who can perceive us, see us maybe? Just like to the 2D creature, your perspective would probably seem supernatural. Imagine having that particular 4-dimensional thing experiencing us, and we would call it supernatural. But it's relativity, space and time are combined into something called spacetime, a 4-dimensional description of events, and this leads to a fascinating philosophical idea called the block universe. The basic idea is that past, present, and future can be thought of as a different part of different areas. Maybe you can think of it like a movie, but it can also be thought of different parts of a 4-dimensional space-time structure, and we experience them one moment after the other. Your birth is somewhere along it, your childhood is somewhere, and then there's moment along somewhere that's happening, and your future is just somewhere along the same structure. We don't have evidence that human consciousness can actually perceive the future this way, but physics does not prove Paul's prescience, but Dune gives us an incredible fictional questions. What would reality feel like to a mind that would perceive time differently from us? And now things get even more interesting. What if we bring into the third part, spiritual part of it all? What if consciousness is more than we think? Because the idea of seeing beyond ordinary time isn't only found in science fiction, right? Across different spiritual and psychological and philosophical traditions, humans have wondered whether consciousness can experience reality beyond our ordinary perception of time. People talk about intuition, visions, prophecy, altered states of consciousness, a sense of knowing something before it happens. Prescience is just like foreseeing things. So science, of course, doesn't currently establish that these experiences give someone genuine access to the future, but here's when the conversation becomes beautiful. Maybe we are looking at the same mystery through completely different languages. The neuroscientists might say the subconscious brain is processing information and making different predictions before the consciousness awareness catches up and sees which one is the most probable outcome, and it just finds out that okay, this is going to be the future. And that is not the kind of prediction that Paul actually goes through, though. And the spiritualist might say that the consciousness can sometimes perceive something beyond an ordinary experience. And Dune says, what if that ability could be taken to an impossible extreme? What if Paul's subconscious isn't simply predicting the next moment but experiencing possibilities that haven't happened yet? And that brings us to the world of Dune. Well, to be very honest, these are two different things. I know they sound very similar, that you're talking about experiencing something and having to know what is going to happen, but they're different. While reading about it, just felt it can be true. There are many people, a few of my friends, who have seen visions or maybe dreams, and they have come true. And it just felt like maybe talking about it is necessary. So the science fiction part of it is the Bene Gesserit and that portion, and this is where Frank Herbert's idea becomes much more interesting than simply giving his protagonist a superpower. Bene Gesserit had been manipulating bloodlines for generations through their breeding program. Their goal was to produce someone capable of accessing forms of awareness that even the Bene Gesserit could not. They trained the body, trained the mind, trained perception, and Paul becomes the unexpected result of all of this. Then comes the spice, and Paul's abilities don't simply give them information, they force him to confront the possibilities. He sees the futures, he sees the path, he sees the consequences, and eventually the distinction between seeing the future and creating a future starts to collapse. That's what makes Paul's story so tragic, because the more he sees, the less freedom he seems to have, asking which future am I going to choose? What is it that I am going to do to make any of this possible? And perhaps the most terrifying possibility is this, that maybe Paul isn't a man who can escape destiny because he can see it. Maybe he's a man who becomes trapped by destiny because he can see it. And that's why I think Dune is asking a much bigger question than this: can humans see the future? It's asking, if you could see the future, would knowing it actually make you more free? Will you know what is going to happen, and still will you be able to make corrections, or maybe let it remain the same way? If there's something good that's happening and you want it to happen, will it still happen if you try to create scenarios which just let it go the same way? Or would you simply become another part of the future that you're trying to escape? So maybe the real power isn't seeing the future, maybe it's surviving the knowledge of it. And with this, I'm going to end the video, and I really would want to know what your thoughts are, and what thought. This is just a thought experiment, okay? So I want to know what you think. Which part are you more inclined towards, and what do you like reading about more? Psychology portion, the portion that includes the physics, the space-time area, or the science fiction part? And I would definitely want you all to read this book and let me know your reviews, and any ideas and everything. They're all welcome. Thank you.